Guild Goes Green series across August, and today myself, Dan Jefferson, the Deputy Chair for the Pipeline Industry, are hosting today's webinar with Tata Steel. We've got Barry Rust here. Barry has worked in the steel industry in energy-related markets for over 20 years. During that time, he's undertaken sales, marketing, and project management roles and operated internationally with the focus areas in Asia and Africa. As Energy and Sustainability Manager, Barry is part of the development team for Tata Steel's circular economy construction and can't even say the word now. Infrastructure solutions. Apologies, Barry, for that. So I'm going to hand over to Barry now, and we'll crack on with today's webinar. If you've got any questions as we go on, if you could please capture them in the chat, and we'll bring them up at the end. Otherwise, I'll hand over to you now, Barry. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. That's easy for you to say. Yeah, as Dan said, I'm Energy and Sustainability Manager at Tata Steel. So I've been involved my whole career in the pipelines industry, and I've been a member of the PIG during that time as well. So it's a real pleasure today for me to be here to present on net zero steel and pipelines. What I'll do today is I'll if I just try and move my slide, there we go. I'll do a short introduction to the Tata Group today and Tata Steel before what we at Tata Steel see as the key sustainability challenges for many of us going forward, before describing the potential pathways to carbon neutrality for steel and pipelines, and outlining some of the key work and technologies that Tata Steel are involved in on that journey. And finally, I'll come to some of the activities we undertake to drive what I call everyday sustainability. So Tata Group was founded by Jamsetji Tata, so it's been a family group for many, many years, in 1868, and is today a global enterprise headquartered in India, comprising about 30 companies which operate in more than 100 countries. The mission, and this is quite resonant, and is to improve the quality of life of the communities we serve globally through long-term stakeholder value creation based on leadership with trust. And the reason that that's resonant as well for the whole of the Tata Group is that the Tata Sons, which is the principal investment holding company and promoter of the Tata Group of companies, is 66% owned by philanthropic trusts, which support education, health, livelihood generation, arts, culture. So, it's effectively the quality of life of our communities, and sustainability being clearly a key part of that. It's a very important subject to Tata Steel Group companies. In terms of Tata Steel in Europe, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but we're one of the most, it's not yet, but it will be, the geographically diversified steel producers in the world. We operate in 25, 26 countries, commercial offices in 35. But within Europe, we're one of the largest steel producers. We have two main steelmaking centres in the north of the Netherlands and in South Wales, with quite a few downstream manufacturing bases, and that will become important later on in the presentation, throughout Europe, as well as a multitude of distribution and service centres shown there in the green. In terms of our R&D and environmental operations, they're centred in the Netherlands, South Wales and the centre of England. In terms of Tata Steel in the UK, we're the largest steel company, and as such clearly act as a key foundation to many other industries and supply chains. We employ around 9,000 people engaged across academia, communities, and many other external partnerships, and some of which we'll talk about today. Moving a little bit closer to the pipelines home, we operate our energy and power portfolio out of the UK, which manufactures through a full integrated steel supply chain, with tubular manufacturing facilities up there in the northeast at the Hartlepool 20-inch mill, and there in the centre of England at Corby. From those facilities, we produce offshore and onshore structural materials, as well as a full range of onshore and offshore pipelines, and oil country tubular goods. So with the introductions made, we'll now look at what we see as the main sustainability or sustainable challenges. And these are climate change, circular economy, and responsible business, or being responsible. And for this presentation, we're focusing on pathways to carbon neutrality. So clearly, climate change is going to dominate, but we do touch on the other areas. But if anybody's disappointed that we're not talking specifically more about circular economy or responsible business, then I'd be really pleased to engage outside of this call. There's a lot of work I and my colleagues are doing in these areas, both from a kind of corporate and a product and a process and a site perspective. So I'd be really pleased to engage on that. So I think I'm probably teaching Granny to suck eggs here a little bit, but I think we're all aware of this narrative. Sustainability megatrends are shaping our world, namely, and very importantly, climate change or climate emergency, resource scarcity and demographic shifts. And of course, this is feeding into societal expectations in public opinion, policies, regulatory frameworks, and legislation. And this is clearly impacting on business, the business environment, and businesses need to address these risks and opportunities as well associated with this impact. And clearly, the business stakeholders represented by the blue stick people there have expectations, and I include myself as one of those stakeholders of not just Tata Steel as a business, as an employee, but as a member of the community around Tata Steel also. And of course, our customers, our clients, and other businesses have expectations. So being sustainable in every sense, which is the core mission statement of Tata Steel, is very important. And I'm hoping that some of these slides will demonstrate the importance of this work to Tata Steel, and of course, outline some of that work. This presentation or webinar isn't the end of the game. I'd really encourage further dialogue and separate dialogue outside of this webinar as well. So my contact details are at the end of this webinar, so we can engage in that. So I think the first thing to say is, and I think it's important to understand this, is in the world of sustainability, all is not sometimes as it seems. And these images here demonstrate that the subject of sustainability, and in particular environmental sustainability, which is the main focus of this presentation, is a complex matter. Mark Twain, the American writer, once said there are three types of lies. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I know now, working in the field of sustainability for the last 5 or 6 years, there are plenty of statistics in the sustainability world. And this is why we need to take care in any claims we make for our products. Tata Steel, any business, any venture needs to take care in the claim we make for our products and our processes. Unfortunately, within Tata Steel, I'm able to receive expert guidance, and we've got some expert life cycle assessment and sustainability professionals, and they're my first port of call on any technical sustainability matter. But we'll talk a little bit about life cycle and its importance in a second. These images are a useful illustration. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but there's an important point in environmental sustainability. So making the optimum resource decision to limit the impact on the environment and our communities needs to consider the whole life impact, not just the immediate impact of the action. So is it better to drive a diesel car and produce emissions directly, or is it better to invest in an electric car and perhaps push those emissions further upstream? Clearly, if we've got a decarbonised electricity grid, then that's an easy answer, but we haven't, and I don't know the answer to this question right now. But if I wanted to properly address it and come up with a proper answer, which was maximize my chances of making the right resource decision, I need to gather the relevant data across the life cycle, including the life cycle of the car, the power plant, in order to make a more informed decision. And this is true of all resource decisions. The whole life cycle is critical to proper assessment. In terms of Tata Steel, our vision align with the main sustainability challenges, which so our mission is to decarbonize our processes, clearly in line with legislation, but we've got some key milestones there around 2030 and 2050. In addition to work with other industries to leverage circular economy and ensure nothing is wasted. And steel companies, not just Tata Steel, but steel companies are pretty good at that already. And I go on to talk a little bit about that later on. And our aim, of course, is to continue to operate as a responsible business that benefits people, partners, society, you, me. In terms of the challenges I outlined, Tata Steel are active in the development, if we look at climate change to start with, of a phased plan to deliver carbon neutral steel making. We're going to drill into that today. That'll include low CO2 steelmaking technology and wider technology that's going to be required, including infrastructure and infrastructure technology. And external partnerships and collaborations are critical in that. In terms of circular economy, I've already mentioned the importance of life cycle, and we continue to drive this message of life cycle, whole life costing, whole life carbon, and life cycle assessment across the sectors that we work in within Tata Steel. We're able to do this because that group of people I mentioned earlier on in Tata Steel's environmental operations or environmental area, they're world-class life cycle assessment guys and girls, and they have distinct world-class expertise across this. So they're instrumental in helping us develop our products, including our augmented products, to minimize natural resource use and develop more and more design for reuse, recovery and recyclability across all of our sectors: energy, automotive, construction. In terms of responsible business, a key area I think for this is transparency and reporting. If you're not transparent and reporting, then you're nowhere. And to a certain extent, performance is less important than transparency and reporting initially. It has to start with transparency and reporting. And I think, I would say this, of course, but I think we hold some leadership positions in some areas of our transparency and reporting. So we're the only steel company in the world that operate an environmental product declaration program under ISO standards. So we're able to deliver bespoke product environmental declarations across our portfolio. And we're doing that today from a standing start of 2.5 years ago with no third-party verified international first-class EPDs. We're now got over 30. I'm on the governance committee for that environmental program, and we have plans to produce another 15 or 20 in the next 12 months. We also have the largest portfolio of products certified as responsibly sourced against a standard called BES 6001, which is an external third-party annual verification program that looks at a complete suite of variables, including right back to iron ore and raw material extraction. Our focus today, however, is on pathways to carbon neutral steelmaking and pipelines. So we'll move on to that now. So if we're going to look at those pathways, I think a good place to start is probably with history. And this slide here, 15, is I wanted to take a quick look at historical embodied performance in the next 2 slides. And that brings us to our potential pathways and our roadmap options, if you like, to carbon neutral steelmaking. In short, this involves, in the short term, this involves working with best available technologies and aligning our asset strategy to ensure that we don't make decisions today that impact on our agility for decarbonization investments tomorrow. And like many heavy industries, the steel industry investment cycles are a long one, and assets typically last a long time. So investment cycles 10 years plus, asset lives 20, 30 years. So that asset alignment is, whilst it's quite a simple statement to make, is a really complex area and a really important activity that we need to undertake. In the medium term, it's a mixture of measures for rapid decarbonisation, including carbon capture and storage, and carbon capture and usage, and various industrial symbiosis activities. And we'll drill into that also. In the longer term, we are looking to new and scaled technologies to deliver carbon neutral steelmaking. Some of those will include low CO2 steelmaking technologies that are available today, like Hisano, which is a Tata Steel technology. And it'll include other technologies, including, for example, hydrogen steelmaking, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. I think it's important to point out now that there'll be no one golden bullet or solution. This will be a mixture of technologies over a periods of time to maximize the acceleration of the decarbonisation process. So if we start with that technology I already mentioned, Hisano, which I think is an old Saxon term for iron, but I can't swear to that. But this technology was initially developed as part of a 48 company conglomerate or network called ULCOS, or the Ultra Low CO2 Steelmaking Consortium. Tata Steel has bought the rights a few years ago out to this technology completely, so it's now Tata Steel's technology, and we've invested in a large-scale plant. We're producing around equivalent of about 60,000 tons of steel per annum, so a relatively small plant if we consider that the steel plant next door could make up to 4 or 5 million tons. But we've been running trials to develop and optimize that technology. And the benefits of Hisano become clear when you have a look at traditional basic oxygen steel making, which typically is shown there on the graphic, the blast furnace graphic there on the left. So that process requires coal preheating and iron ore melting prior to putting that coking coal into the blast furnace and the sinter, the melted iron ore, into the blast furnace. With Hisano, these processes are not required, and you can directly inject into the Hisano vessel, or it's called a cyclone. And the benefits in terms of carbon reduction or reduction in carbon intensity were estimated theoretically at around 20%. However, production runs show that the carbon emission reductions are somewhere in the region of 50%, so considerably better than we'd anticipated. And there are further important benefits too, in terms of reduction in particulates and other emissions, and also the ability, where appropriate, to use higher scrap, utilize higher volumes of scrap in the process. It's also, and this is really important, very well suited in terms of the concentration of the gases that emit from the Hisano process is very well suited to carbon capture. This is a theoretical figure because we don't have carbon capture in place at the moment on the pilot, but theoretical potential of up to 80% reduction in CO2 emissions utilizing this process. So the next steps for Hisano, the further proving of the technology and scaling it. So we move to another technology that's going to be important in the medium term, which also aligns with the Hisano technology, and that's carbon capture and storage. Clearly, this is an interim measure as carbon is still being produced at scale, albeit it is being captured. And whilst it is an interim measure, it does offer opportunities, for rapid decarbonisation. There are challenges with carbon capture and storage, but both in terms of the capture and the storage element. One solution for storage is the use of depleted gas fields, and we've seen relatively recently the appraisal and injection license granted to Pale Blue Dot Energy, and I attended a webinar only a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, with Pale Blue Dot Energy on their Acorn carbon capture project, and a really exciting project it is too. Tata Steel have also been involved in a number of projects in this regard, and one of them shown here on the left-hand graphic is the Athos project, looking at the feasibility of such storage, in this case in the North Netherlands industrial cluster. So whilst there are still significant challenges in this area, initial feasibility, or the feasibility, certainly the feasibility for Athos was very positive, and I think that's probably a measure of the Pale Blue Dot Energy in terms of the feasibility of this technology. Moving further forward in the technology picture, if you like, but there's now industrial symbiosis, and we have a project here called Everest, and this is examining the use of the emissions created during the steelmaking process to create a circular economic value chain. by converting those emissions into useful feedstocks for other industrial processes. I have to say, I don't understand the equations or the chemistry here, but we're working with a number of major industrial partners, including, as shown here, Dow Chemicals, to drive this work and take those waste streams and put them into use the waste as inputs or for other industrial processes. A little bit further into the future, and a little bit probably further back in terms of the technical readiness, but one potential solution for decarbonisation of the steel making process is the use of hydrogen as a reductant in the iron making process. So typically a reductant in basic oxygen steel making, or the iron making process for basic oxygen steel making, is to use coking coal to reduce the iron. But of course, the effect there is to produce CO2, and hydrogen reacts with iron ore in a very similar fashion to the coking coal, but rather than CO2 being the byproduct, H2O is the byproduct, so water vapor, which is clearly a lot more beneficial than carbon dioxide. Hydrogen also has a huge potential for wider industrial decarbonisation, and also for decarbonisation of transport potentially as well. But there are a number of challenges in this area. A process known as electrolysis, and that's effectively splitting water into its component elements of oxygen and hydrogen, has the potential to deliver clean, low carbon hydrogen, but requires a significant amount of energy to do so. So we can of course use gas to do that and create blue hydrogen, or we can use gas to do that and capture it, and grey hydrogen, and or we can use gas to create the hydrogen and capture it and create blue hydrogen. But clearly we need, for decarbonisation at scale, we need green hydrogen, and that's hydrogen produced with energy that's renewable. And therefore, in order to drive that decarbonisation, we need to see a decarbonisation of the primary energy mix. Offshore and onshore wind farms have real potential to help deliver this, and we see the 10 gigawatts, I think, in UK offshore waters, and the plan for a further 4 in the round 4 bidding for the offshore wind farms. I'm not an expert in this area, but certainly offshore wind has big potential in this area to decarbonise the energy mix and enable that decarbonised hydrogen production. So we're working with a number of partners in this area, including the graphic there you can see on the right-hand side, the Hermes project. And there are a number of, I won't go into detail because we don't have time in this presentation, but there are a number of resources out there relating to the Hermes project. There's a short YouTube video, I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes, which is a really nice resource to get up to speed very quickly on that. If you just simply search for Hermes Tata Steel, you'll find it. You'll find a Dutch version and an English version, so you can take your choice. We haven't got time to drill any more into that area, but what I wanted to do, and I've been talking about this consistently, is the challenges associated with the pathways to carbon neutral steelmaking. And it's probably fair to say that industrial decarbonisation is right now, and is going to continue to be a major challenge for us. But I thought it was worth outlining a few more of the challenges, or being a bit more specific in the challenges for steel. And in comparison with some other industrial decarbonisation, then of course scale is a big issue for steel. Steel is the most used metal in the world. It's also the most recycled metal in the world. And it's central to many sectors, from mobile communications, whether that's the communications equipment or the outside of your mobile phone, through to transport. So it's a key foundation industry. So in terms of challenges, first of all, on the left-hand side here, I'd like to reiterate the energy mix challenge. So steel plants in Europe are already fairly efficient. We have in place the capturing and reuse of waste, whether that's waste gas, waste heat from the iron making process that goes to the steel plant, or whether it's taking the waste from steel and feeding it as feedstock to other industries. So, for example, the concrete industry uses ground-based slag, which is a waste product from the steel making process. And by using that to make concrete, it saves millions and millions of tons of CO2 in the concrete making process when compared with the other alternatives for the concrete industry. So there are already some considerable circular economic value chains ongoing, but for large-scale industrial decarbonisation, vast amounts of renewable energy are going to be required, therefore requiring big shifts in the primary energy mix. And I know renewable energy is growing extremely fast, but it is from a rather small base. So we do face some significant challenges there, of course. There are also internal constraints, moving to the central section. The capital intensive nature I've already mentioned in the steel industry, with the long investment cycles and life of assets. Therefore, each configuration change has a history and a future, and therefore has to fit with the existing asset base while still enabling transformation. And that's a considerable headache for all steel makers. And then finally, there's the technology challenge and the technology readiness, and a potential number of decarbonisation technologies are rather low levels of technology readiness or require scaling. So Hisano is a good example. It's pretty much technology ready, but it does require scaling up. Hydrogen there are no large-scale electrolysis generators, I think, in existence today, not in the scale required. Therefore, this is why industrial partnership and collaboration, and you've seen that through the last 3 or 4 slides. I don't think there's a single slide on there that didn't include an external industrial partner or technology provider, is going to be critical going forward. And I kind of touch on that as well at the end of the presentation in everyday sustainability. Well, I touch on it now on everyday sustainability. So it's natural for a presentation such as this that's focusing on industrial decarbonisation to look at medium and long-term solutions by their very nature. And of course, we need to work hard today on those medium and long-term solutions if we're going to deliver them. However, we're also working today delivering decarbonisation. And I just wanted to touch on how, as an industry, a pipelines industry, we can do that through partnership and collaboration. And it's really not rocket science, of course. Many of us are doing it on a day-to-day basis. But if we turn to pipelines for our inspiration here, the first question, of course, must be, and must always be, in any resource decision: do we need the resource? Do we need the pipeline? Do we need the building? Do we need the vessel? So the ultimate resource efficiency, of course, is not to use those resources. However, if we assume that there is a valid need, then reducing those resources not only makes financial sense, but reduces our impacts in the environment. And a classic example of this, of course, is utilizing tight tolerance manufacturing processes such as welded pipelines to reduce the amount of steel used in pipelines for a given design. I won't spend time going through this example here, and the presentation will be made available obviously separately. But working together as an industry in collaboration to drive value right through the supply chain will also deliver resource efficiency. And that's a way of continuing to drive everyday sustainability and to make improved resource decisions. And it's not just about reducing the amount of steel that you purchase by being clever in purchasing the right steel. It's about also those manufacturing processes and tolerances and taking advantage of them, not just in the material, but in the downstream processes. So with those tight tolerances, for example, we deliver faster fit up and improved welding speeds, for example, during construction, all of which deliver downstream reductions in resource use, therefore delivering resource improvements through the value chain. I think finally, innovation has a really important part to play here too. I've focused in on new product development here on the left, but I think as an industry we can continue to work in collaboration And there are many good examples of such collaboration, but I think we can do more in areas such as new product development to deliver further resource efficiency. So understanding the downstream needs, delivering it back upstream to make the right manufacturing and asset investments, and to make the right product in development investments. This might be related to the physical product, or this might be related to the augmented product, the data associated with that product. And I think, unfortunately, I haven't had time to go into some of the data work that we're doing and the ambitions we have in that area. But it's going to be a really important area going forward to deliver both financial and resource efficiencies. If we move to the central graphic here, I wanted to point out a process within Tata Steel. It's called our NPD, or New Product Development Sustainability Assessment. And so this process allows us to assess, or compels us to assess, the environmental sustainability of the products that we're working on developing. And that assessment becomes a core part of the business case. The assessment itself is based on a given chosen baseline, whether that's an existing product from Tata Steel or a competitor's product. And the choice of that baseline clearly, of course, is critical. But we've developed and matured that process over the last couple of years, and we're now working with a couple of our customers in our automotive sector and our construction sector, looking at rolling out similar processes within their organisation. And finally, whilst upstream steelmaking decarbonisation is what we're focused on here today, and is of course critical, and of course is the big win area. 80 to 90% of the impact of a pipeline or a construction product is in the steelmaking. Therefore, that's where we of course need to focus, but we mustn't forget about those downstream facilities. And I mentioned this at the start and showed you those downstream facilities throughout Europe, like the 20-inch pipe mill at Hartlepool, where we manufacture our H5 pipelines from the steel we make. So the incremental and continuous work that we do downstream, and we haven't got time to go into it here, but across transport, energy use, lighting, simple incremental work that we do on a day-to-day basis, and we've got a number of cases of areas where we've made those incremental gains, become a really important part of our process of decarbonisation. And whilst the numbers are small, the timing is now, and that makes it really important to show both improvement and endeavour. So I think, I'm not sure what time we have. What are we, 41? So it took a little bit longer to present than I anticipated, but that was a whirlwind through a big subject area. But I'm happy to take questions now, but if we do run out of time for questions, I think you put in the chat box, I've been promised by the Guild that I will receive those questions, and I promise to answer them in writing to the individuals who present them. So I think that just leaves me with, and there's my email there, should you wish to contact me directly and maybe takes up some engagement separately, and I'd certainly welcome that. But that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you all for dialing in. I, like a graceful swan, have been flapping around in the background trying to stay connected. So I've unfortunately missed a few of your slides and a few of the moments through the presentation, but we'll be looking to catch up on this one, as I have a few of the other webinars on the Pipeline Industry Guild YouTube page. So once this one's uploaded, I'll be definitely dining into it and taking it on all of today's presentation on board. I do have one question for you though, Barry, and it's I guess it's around that early engagement piece which you picked up on there with regards to, you know, whether we should undertake the works or the construction of a new pipeline, a new structure from a steel perspective from day one in the first place. And I wonder how often Tata Steel as a whole get involved with client organisations, consultants, designers in that early stages to develop solutions. So you talk about some R&D. And I do apologise if you touched on it in the presentation. Like I say, I was flapping a bit like a swan under the water, trying to stay connected. So
no problem.
Question for myself.
Sure. Yeah, we're fortunate in that we do get involved in early stages, and sometimes that's at front end design as well. We've got a number of enlightened clients who do approach us. We've got good relationships with, and we do get the opportunity to be involved. That's less about whether the pipeline is required in itself. I think that's part of an earlier decision making process, both I guess financial and other variables involved there. But certainly we are involved in the process where we can be, and we certainly encourage it. And it does sound silly for a bunch of commercial guys or marketing guys or environmental guys within a steel company to be promoting the sale of less steel, but that's effectively what our guys are able to do with their design knowledge, their material knowledge, their steel making knowledge, and their process knowledge. They're able to deliver some of those benefits to the client who may not be aware of them. So it's a key part of our process. In terms of the R&D, I think the frequency of kind of joint R&D projects are much less, but they do exist, they do happen. I'd certainly encourage more engagement on the larger R&D front. I think we've probably got more opportunities to do that as well, particularly if we look at data provision and driving value with data. It's probably a little bit easier in one respect, doing it from a data perspective, although there are other challenges. So yeah, R&D probably less, but we've got some good examples over the last few years of where we've done that with clients, but we'd certainly encourage more.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Barry. Like I say, I haven't seen any questions come through on the chat stream from others, so I do apologise if I've missed them. A couple of thank yous from past chairman of the guild and people involved with the guild elsewhere. So, and a huge thank you from myself, Barry, for taking the time out today to present to us and in the guild as a whole on the Guild Goes Green seminars. Just to remind people of some of the other events that are coming up. If you do have opportunity to visit the Pipeline Industry Guild website page, you'll see the events tab at the top of the page there and be able to see all the upcoming events on the diary. One in particular, one which is getting some communication and some high engagement at the moment, is the National Dinner. So this is taking place in March next year, and again, there's still opportunities for people to be involved in that from a sponsorship and ticket perspective. So I'm going to wrap things up there. I'm conscious of people's time, and we try to get done for 1:15. Huge thank you again, Barry, for today, and hopefully get to see you all again soon.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.